There are only two places in the United States that you can find living coral reef formations. One can be found in the flower garden banks of the Gulf of Mexico off the Texas coast. The other, the Florida Keys. If, like me, you grew up in South Florida, then the Florida Keys at some point became very important in your life, whether it was for a long weekend, a vacation, or just to go down and party for the day. If you were to go to Key Largo or even as far down as Key West, you had to pass one of the most popular destinations in the entire state of Florida, John Pennekamp Coral Reef State Park. And that's where we're talking about today, in this episode of Tales from South Florida. Cue the music.
Let's take a talk down memory lane, 'cause the stories around here are just insane. Pirates World, the Sporto and Wolfies do. Palm Beach to Key West, that's where we grew. These are the tales from South Florida for you. With your host, Bill Monty.
John Pennekamp Coral Reef State Park is the first underwater park in the United States. It extends about 3 miles out into the Atlantic Ocean. The park was placed into the National Registry of Historic Places in 1972. But how did it get there? And what was the story of John Pennekamp State Park? I have to admit, as a child, when I'd go down with my parents, we never stopped there, which is amazing to me. We seem to have always been going on the way to Key West. Sometimes my father had to do work down there, and we would stop at Bahia Honda State Park, I remember, and then go into Key West. But I don't recall, outside of maybe stopping at a couple of tourist shops, actually spending some time in Key Largo. So how did this park even come to be? Well, the plans to build this underwater park actually started back in the 1930s. They were looking to create the Everglades National Park, and there was a commission. This plan included the reefs off of Key Largo, but there was so much opposition from outdoorsmen and local commissioners, people who owned houses and businesses on Key Largo, that it just didn't happen at that time. Everglades National Park was eventually created in 1947, but it did not include Key Largo or any of the reefs. Now, come about 1957, 1958, there was this growth of concern from the local citizens about damage occurring to the reefs along the Keys. You had seashells and sponges and especially and most importantly the coral that were being hammered and dynamited to oblivion basically, and all in the name of souvenirs for tourists. One man in particular who worked for the Marine Institute of Miami, Dr. Gilbert Voss, was concerned about this. So he teamed up with an editor from the Miami Herald named John D. Pennekamp. Pennekamp had been an editor for a long time, first came to Miami from Cincinnati during the Florida land boom to write a story on it, and decided to stay because the climate was better, and there was a daughter of a Cincinnatian who had moved to Miami that he happened to have the hots for. He even married her 3 months after moving here. So Pennekamp and Voss teamed up, and through a lot of articles that were written in the Herald, a lot of public awareness that was brought about what was happening to the reefs and the potential impact to our entire ecosystem in the future, we started making some headway to create this incredible, unique national park. Now, Pennekamp had strong credentials for the fight. He had been active in establishing the Everglades National Park way back when. He'd also been on the Florida Board of Parks and Historic Memorials, and he was a consultant at one point in time with the United States Fish and Wildlife Services. All of these efforts led eventually to the Florida Board of Parks and Historic Memorials to designate the state-controlled reefs off of Key Largo as a permanent protected preserve. In 1960, President Eisenhower proclaimed the adjacent federally controlled area of the reefs to be named Key Largo Coral Reef Preserve. Now, Gilbert Voss had other ideas. He really believed that had it not been for Pennekamp and the work of the Miami Herald, that the Coral Reef State Park would have never come into existence. And he advocated for it to be named after Pennekamp. And it worked. Florida Governor Leroy Collins later changed the name of the park to John Pennekamp Coral Reef State Park in recognition of his efforts to save marine life. Access to US 1 was needed, and all of that was acquired by purchase and by donations, and the park opened in 1963. If you've been to Pennekamp Park, you know that the land part of it is nice, but it's certainly not what's going to keep you coming back time and time again. It's an underwater park, and to enjoy it, you have to go out onto the water, and then you have to get into the water. And certainly one of the most famous sights in the park is the statue of Jesus, the Christ of the Abyss. The statue itself is 8.5 feet tall. It weighs over 4,000 pounds. It stands in nearly 25 feet of water. So if you're not a scuba diver, you're a snorkeler, you can still get to it. But how did we go about getting that? Well, the statue is a third casting of Il Cristo degli Abissi, which is in the Mediterranean Sea near Genoa, Italy. It was placed there off of Italy in 1954. The Christ of the Abyss statue, that third casting, was donated to the Underwater Society of America in 1961 by a scuba diving entrepreneur, Egidio Cresci. It was placed in its current location in 1965. Now, there was a lot of opposition to that placement. People didn't think it would stay. What was going to happen? Would it just wash away? Would it become a hazard to boats that were in the area or to scuba divers? Well, they soon found out, because right after it was placed, Hurricane Betsy came streaming through the Florida Keys. And after it left, the statue was doing just fine. By the way, interesting to note that in their current positions, the two statues, the one off of Italy and the one off of Key Largo, well, they face each other. I've talked about before, when I was in my late teens and early 20s, I became fascinated with the music of Jimmy Buffett. As I record this, it is the day, 1 year to the date, that Jimmy Buffett passed away. My friend Paul and I, who loved Buffett's music at the time, came up with the grand idea of becoming certified in scuba diving and going to the Keys all the time and living the Jimmy Buffett lifestyle that he pushed in his songs. So we went to a place in Hollywood called Divers Unlimited on Hollywood Boulevard. Any Divers Unlimited alumni out there? Raise your hand. Hey, how you doing? And we took the lessons. I remember going to South Broward High School in the pool. A very stormy night, lots of lightning around. Couldn't believe we didn't get out of the water, but we didn't, because scuba divers are tough. Our open dive certification test was going to be in the waters off of Key Largo in Pennekamp State Park. When it came time to go down there, Paul and I headed down. We checked into a Howard Johnson's that no longer exists on the island. We went out into, there was like some canal areas in back of the hotel, where we did the first part of our test and certification dive. I remember that being really hard to see and kind of gnarly water. And then the next day we were going to go out and get certified. The next morning we all gathered at the boat. We went out. Pretty strong current, as I recall. There were a couple of people that had a little trouble with it. But once we jumped into that water, Paul and I were completely bitten by the scuba diving bug. The beauty of the reefs, the fish that would surround you. The Jaws theme always played in the back of my head. So if you're wondering, yes, it did. But it was just absolutely magical. And at that moment, for me, John Pennekamp Park became synonymous with the Florida Key lifestyle. It was just so wonderful. We had a great time partying that weekend. I don't think I can even tell you what happened back at the Howard Johnson Hotel, but needless to say, the management wasn't quite pleased with the entire group of scuba divers. We were a very uninhibited group back then. And Paul and I managed to make it down many more times down to the Pennekamp area. There is a Holiday Inn. It's been there since the beginning of time, I think. And it's got a marina next to it. And that Holiday Inn is the one where if you want to go, you can take a ride on the African Queen. They claim it's the African Queen from the movie with Bogart and Hepburn. I don't know if it really is. But anyway, that's the Holiday Inn. And there was a boat that went out from that marina called the Sea Fever. It would take you out on Friday afternoon About 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock, it would leave the marina. It would come back around 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock on Sunday. And those were just some of the great and memorable times in my life, diving on Shark Reef, Molasses Reef, all of those areas out there. Yeah, Pennekamp Park was a huge part of our enjoyment of scuba diving and the Florida Keys. I'll never forget those times. And tonight, in memory of Jimmy Buffett, maybe I'll pop on some of his old tunes, see if I can't just relive that, get the taste of salt water in my mouth once more, and think about all the great times that I had down at John Pennecamp's park. What about you, my friends? What are your adventures down in the Florida Keys? Did you go scuba diving, snorkeling? Have you taken the glass bottom boat tour out there? Yeah, you can go out to that Statue of Christ and never get your feet wet if you don't want to, because of the glass bottom boat tour rides. And just for the record, no, I have no financial affiliation with anything down in John Pennekamp Park or any of the establishments that I've mentioned. If you'd like to share any of your memories with me, just go ahead and click. You can do that, whatever app you're listening on. If you just go down to the show notes, you can see that you can text me a message. Or you can always give me a call at 754-800-3170. Leave a voicemail and talk about your experience down in the Florida Keys, and specifically Key Largo and John Pennekamp Park. Please remember to hit that like button. Remember to hit subscribe so you can be notified of upcoming episodes. And please comment and share so we can help grow the podcast. We're 25 episodes strong right now, and we have a lot of great things that are coming up still. And I couldn't have done any of it without you, so thank you very much. I do appreciate it. Be sure to join me in my other podcast, America 451, available on Spotify and YouTube, and Bill Monty's Guide for Getting Older, available wherever fine podcasts can be found. Until next time, my friends, remember, be safe and be kind.
Let's take a talk down memory lane, 'cause the stories around here are just insane. Pirates World, the Sporto and Wolfies too, Palm Beach to Key West, that's where we grew. These are the tales from South Florida for you, with your host Bill Monty.